Hey, Chris,
Yeah, Paul.
I had a thought.
What was your thought?
I think Americans need to be less concerned with being patriotic.
Like waving their flags outside of their homes patriotic?
Well, I mean, I think obviously that's the purest form of patriotism is to fly the flag of your country. But I don't want to disparage anyone who has an appreciation or gratitude to their country and the people who defend their country. But I think that we've gone way over the top with this patriotism to the point where I would call it toxic patriotism. And an example of that is guns, right? A lot of people, especially in the South, being from the South, I happen to know this firsthand, that owning a gun for people has a very strong sense of patriotism. Or eating meat. For some reason, eating meat, especially cattle, especially beef,
The manly
cattle.
meats?
Yeah. It's almost as though patriotism is a stand in for masculinity. So, those are like a couple examples where they really have nothing to do with America. I don't even think cows are native to North America. So,
So you're
I don't
saying they
think,
should be eating buffalo is what you're telling me.
yeah, buffalo or, I mean, what else? There aren't
Corn.
very
Buffalo
many.
and corn, right? Isn't that what's so that what you just said is patriotism to me is just those are just those are identity objects, identity things. Guns, meat, that kind of stuff isn't patriotism. That's just identity it's like identity politics in a three-word summary, right?
I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think that patriotism is sort of turned into what someone is comfortable with in their life. Your upbringing defines what you're patriotic about because patriotism, there's not one other than what you said, which is flying a flag, which is universally patriotic. You could go to any state in the Union and their version of being patriotic will be entirely different from what somebody else's version of being patriotic might be. And what I think the problem with that is now we're getting into tribalism. You're not being patriotic because you're not doing it the way that I do it. And I think that that's problematic. And obviously in today's age, it's very difficult to relate to people who are different from you, especially on the internet. The internet is pretty rife with toxic anything. And so I think there's this sort of blurring of lines when it comes to, as you said, personal preference, personal aesthetic, personal beliefs, political beliefs, and just good old patriotism. I saw a Reddit or a subreddit or some sort of thing on Reddit where somebody asked the question, what do you define as purely American? And obviously, a lot of people said eating hot dogs and hamburgers. And that, which was immediately a thing in my brain, was like, well, no, you just like hamburgers. You've grown up eating them, but those two things are definitely not American, at least have no roots in American. We just happen to do them. And so that is why we sort of define it as being our own. Arguably, hot dogs are European, if anything. We kind of stole that. Patriotism has turned into a tribalistic instinct or tribalistic urge instead of it
Yes.
being a expression of your gratitude toward your country or your appreciation of your country. It's more of a I'm patriotic because I'm doing this thing that I happen to like to do.
My idea of patriotism is different than your idea of patriotism. So your idea of patriotism is almost like the symbols and actions I perform to demonstrate that I love America or I am American. Versus my idea of patriotism is just a feeling in your gut that you love the country that you were born in. Almost, right? Probably from some kind of evolutionary, just natural human instinct that my tribe is my country. I was born here, therefore I love it kind of concept. And all the arguments, everything you've said so far is like, I'm going to peacock my patriotism, or there's like symbols of that concept, but those aren't, they're maybe patriotic in nature, but that's not patriotism. So I think patriotism as a concept is fine, which is I love my country. Where I thought you were going to go with this discussion was more into the people have become so patriotic that they are now nationalistic, and nationalism is a problem. But you're making more of the argument that people are just are trying to peacock or just demonstrate I'm more patriotic than you by these things that I'm doing, which is then a turnoff from anyone wanting to be patriotic in the first place. Is that
It's
what you're
not
saying?
that it's turning people off from being patriotic. It's that it's being divisive, in that you're not being patriotic in the way that I'm being patriotic, and so therefore you're not being patriotic, and vice versa. And I think I think the word in itself has been a bit sullied, and it's sort of like the word veganism. That word carries so much negative connotation that I think we just should stop using it because, I think
Yeah.
it.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's accurate, right? I go to a dinner with you and Jesse, and I'm like, God damn it.
Right, but see, what's interesting is that I don't think from either me nor Jesse have you ever been accosted or proselytized about the terrors of eating meat or anything like that. We've just ordered something vegan, and maybe we talk about it, but the bad connotation comes from other vegans who are staunchly vegan and emphatically vegan and inflammatorily vegan.
That is one type of a pain in the ass vegan. But you guys are a giant pain in the ass to go to dinner. I have to wait like 10 extra minutes while you guys examine the chef's specials on like how to cook split peas the fourth different way without butter.
In our defense, I will say we would probably be doing that even if we weren't vegan. So we're just.
Did I ever know you in a pre-vegan state?
Maybe very briefly.
I mean, that to me was actually, I thought where you were going to go with patriotism was to the point where people become so patriotic it turns into nationalism, and nationalism is a problem. So just real quick, the Webster definition of patriotism is love or devotion for your country, whereas nationalism is love and devotion for your country plus wanting to hurt or demote a separate country. So patriotism is I love where I live, and nationalism is I love where I live and I hate everybody else, or I actively want them to do less well relative to me.
Well, in a way, it does extend out to that, because when I'm talking about patriotism, your definition that you just gave is the right definition for patriotism. But now I think what it's become is patriotism is not a love for your country. It's how do you express your love for your country. And same thing with nationalism. I think nationalism is a type of patriotism, just the bad kind. It's a bad expression of patriotism. That's my biggest problem, is that I think there's such an emphasis on whether or not you are appearing to be patriotic versus what your actions are or what's going on internally. I mean, for example, when I went to school, elementary school, every morning we would say the Pledge of Allegiance. And, I was 6, 7, 8 years old at the time that we started doing that. And I don't ever remember any sense being instilled into me of patriotism and of what that Pledge of Allegiance means. And all of the words, because they're kind of big words for a 7-year-old. And so we would say it. I memorized it, and we would say it.
It's early brainwashing. Yeah, it's American
exactly.
brainwashing.
And I think that that's probably bad. Now, if my teacher had sat us down and gone through it and said, this is why we say this, and this is what this means, and that would have been better. But no, we just said it, and if we didn't say it, we got in trouble. I mean, did that happen to you?
So I'm a snobby kid, and I went to private school starting in 7th grade. But up until 7th grade, we said the Pledge of Allegiance every day in school. So through 6th grade, and then I had to start saying like a prayer every morning. That was ridiculous. But yeah, it was worse. Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe it's the same.
Well, no, I went to a Catholic private school in elementary school, which is sort of, we probably had a very similar experience in that we would say the Pledge of Allegiance and then we would do morning prayer. Again, it's almost the same thing, whereas we would say the prayer and I really didn't have a good sense of what it meant or what was behind it. The president, or I think most politicians, will wear a lapel pin of the American flag. And
sure.
I think if they didn't do that, they would automatically be accused of being unpatriotic. Or if they didn't make a statement on Memorial Day, that doesn't mean they're not patriotic. That just means they didn't say something on Memorial Day. Patriotism is actually a lot like religion in the sense it's a very internal, personal process. And how you express your patriotism could be totally internal. Same thing with religion. You don't have to go to church every Sunday to be religious or to be devout or pious. So there's this sense that if you don't have an outward expression of your love of your country, that you don't have a love of your country. I think that might be the root of this whole gun thing. I think that, obviously I'm a vegan, I'm going to have this opinion, but I think that might be the root of why we eat so much goddamn meat. We eat so much meat in this country, and I think because we have something locked into our own personalities, our own personal identities, that it's kind of just something we like to do, and we make it okay for ourselves because we tell ourselves, oh, well, it's patriotic. That makes it okay. Again, I'm not saying that no one should have an outward expression of their love of their country. I'm just saying an inward question of how do you truly love your country, and how would you really like to express that other than eating hot dog?
To me, you're talking a lot about signaling to potential friends and mates that I am American, you can be American with me, and we can be American together. What is your vision of true patriotism then? Do you believe that one can be patriotic in a good way? And if so, what are those patriotic actions you can take?
I think being patriotic is a very inward and internal process and expression. But so I can't speak for anybody else in terms of what would be good or bad. But for me, I try and take a moment on the national holidays and truly have a sense of gratitude, even though it's so far removed from me. I've never been in the service. I haven't ever known anybody who was in the service. And so for me, it's very far removed. And so therefore very difficult for me to have an association or to relate to that type of thing. But so I try and make it not abstract. I try and turn it into something real for me. I vote in every single election, no matter how small or how localized. I'll always go to the poll.
So my idea of patriotism is much more cerebral, where it's just I have a sense of tribe that the people around me, both now and when I grew up, shared a common set of values, a common set of life experiences that is America. And I am proud of America because of what it stands for generally. So free markets, democracy. I would hope that we would continue to be accepting and all that kind of fun stuff. I think I disagree with you. Like, if you think guns are patriotic and eating meat is patriotic, so you can go do that stuff as long as you're not actively discriminating against somebody else.
Yeah.
So I brought up the definition of nationalism because that's what I think has happened, is that people become so patriotic they become nationalistic. And then it's, how is America better than other places in the world? And I don't think that's good for a long-term strategy, both for America and for the world, where we're actively rooting for other places to do poorly. And so my idea of patriotism is just appreciating the surroundings I've come from and then lobbying to the best I can with people that I talk to, I guess, which is like for my 4 friends in life and this podcast now that I have a slight outlet to like espouse that idea that right, we come from a shared background. How can we export our values so that everybody wins? And it's not us versus them, whether it be us versus China, us versus the EU, or what have you. And so that's what I'm like, right? So immigration is a big example where I know I'm all for open borders. Like so you might want to put some barriers to entry and not the physical kinds. We don't want walls, but we allow anyone that wants to come to America to come to America. And so that's my concept of what patriotism is believing so much in the ideal of the country that you live in that you're willing to allow as many people that want to come live that shared ideal as possible in with you, and not break down into nationalism, which I think is where the country's going. Even Democratic politicians are still trying to like signal that, hey, we're tough on immigration and we care about Americans more than Mexicans or what have you. And
right.
I think it would be much more interesting to see international policy where it's just like, we'll literally take everybody and we'll figure out how to make it work. Even if I have to pay more taxes, even if I have to do XYZ, I think we need to share a common set of values again and try and make that what patriotism is, and not us versus them, which I think you're also saying a little bit too.
I love 3 things that you said. The first thing being that
I rambled. So
no, it was
I
good.
don't even know what I said.
Well, the first thing was that patriotism does not mean we're better than you. We don't have to be the best country on the planet, because we're kind of not in a lot of different ways. But I think that's okay, and it doesn't preclude us from loving our own country just because we're not number one. I mean, we're number one in a lot of things, but we're not number one in everything. I also like that to lead by example. And even though we might think that we're doing everything right, I think that people, if they would like to adopt the values that we are leading with, then they should. If they don't want to, if they feel like it's not a good idea, then they shouldn't. But this idea of leading by example, I think there's nothing more influential than seeing something work and then you adopting it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, we should be excited. If everyone in the world wants to come here, we're doing something correct. And so I think our response shouldn't be, how do we keep them out and maintain what we have? It's how do we change or improve what we have now to let everybody in? And right. So I'm saying that as a person that most policies that have been passed in the last 2 years and that will be passed probably in the next 10 have like very little bearing on me personally. I get a tax break when the taxes go down, and my taxes will increase if taxes go up. But right, I guess it's probably easier for me to say, let everybody in, because to me, it's just as everyone's a human, like give them, and if they want to live here, give them a shot.
Right.
But I'm probably not the one that's going to be impacted by them, and not that it's necessarily a bad impact. But.
In a way, you are, because I mean that's the third thing that I liked from what you said, is that diversity is key. For some reason, in most things in life, having only one kind of that thing, whether it's a car or a person or race or peanut butter, is bad. A diversity in diet, a diversity in investment portfolio, a diversity in cultural.
As long as you don't eat meat. Right?
As long as you don't eat so much goddamn meat. But I think that those things, for some reason, that seems to be some sort of staple in success, or at least in the ability to thrive.
People approach problems from different perspectives, and that combined vision you get is better than any single vision. It's kind of like when you're married and you end up, or dating someone for a long time, you split your knowledge up between the two of you.
Yeah.
So one person remembers like some stuff, the other person remembers the other, and it's more efficient that way. And so the same thing happens with creating ideas. People have their own experiences that lead to their own interpretation of how to solve a problem that you would never see. I mean, like there's parts of the internet that I don't even know exist, like women's like yoga pants. What are those? I just saw something for like, I mean, a good one from you would just be like, right, like those like monthly tampon delivery boxes. Like that's part of the internet that I was like, what, that exists? That's a thing. You need a diversity of experience and opinion just so you can see what someone is seeing that you couldn't even imagine is a possibility.
Right.
I mean, it happens even to me at work, where I'll work with computer engineers and they approach a problem with technology or from a perspective that I just didn't know a computer could do that. So would you change your initial thought at all after this conversation? Or?
I think toxic patriotism is bad. Anything toxic is bad. I don't think it gets us anywhere. All I think it does is have a negative effect on the general morale of our country. And so I wish people would take a more inward look at what it means to be patriotic, as opposed to the outward look of, do I appear as though I'm being patriotic? If not, what can I do to change that? Because I want to appear to be patriotic. And to reiterate, I think it's a personal expression. And it's up to you, obviously, how you do that expression, but ultimately it's a personal one, because it's based on you. It's based on how do you express yourself artistically. I guess not. I guess I'm going to stick to my guns on it.
My only argument, I feel like you put patriotism in there when you should have been saying toxic identity symbols would have been my version of your thought. And I feel like I did not do a good enough job convince you that was the underlying thought.
I think you did. I think we're just using different words, because my point was that patriotism is no longer patriotism. It's turned into something else. Like that, the definition of that word, not the dictionary definition of that word, but the popular definition of that word is now different. Are
you upset that it's almost commercialized? So, right, if your version of patriotism is an inward-looking reflection on self, do you feel that these outward symbols of patriotism are just like almost the commercialization of the concept? Do you feel like someone's almost impeding on your version of patriotism or corrupting it in some way?
My version of patriotism is not affected by other people's version of patriotism.
Okay.
But in terms of it being commercialized, I think that if you see a commercial on July 4th of a Lay's potato chips bag with an American flag on it, I think
being
that's
eaten by an eagle.
Yes.
On top Yeah, on top of the Rocky Mountains, drinking a Coors Light or something.
Exactly. Yeah, that, I mean, I suppose, is there really any harm in that? I don't know. They're saying you're more patriotic if you drink Coors Light or eat Lay's potato chips. It's silly. I think it's tongue in cheek in a way. I don't know if they were really saying that, but is that what you mean by commercialism or commercialized?
Yeah. Like if they took this, right, if it's almost a religious concept, patriotism, and then they take it and they turn it into marketing and money, does it corrupt in your eyes the whole concept? Is that part of the toxicity of it?
I think it's less about a corporation or what we see on TV influencing what somebody thinks is patriotic. I think it's more about, what do my parents think is patriotic and what do my friends think is patriotic? And there's this weird feedback loop that starts happening where you can't fit in with your friends or your family unless you adopt those traits or those beliefs. And sometimes those beliefs are not so good, you know? And so I think is a little bit more prevalent and more toxic